Each year, there is one event everyone in atomic layer deposition looks forward to, the AVS ALD Conference. This 3-day meeting rotates between the US, Europe, and Asia and is chock full of interesting parallel sessions, an industry exhibition, and a few sponsored extracurricular activities. And this year, it's more highly anticipated than ever. In August, the ALD conference will return for the first time in 20 years to Helsinki, Finland, the technology's place of origin. 2024 marks 50 years since Tuomo Suntolas' original ALD patent, and this year we will celebrate the meteoric rise of the atomic scale process. Since 1974, the interest in ALD has skyrocketed. Thousands of people work with the technology at hundreds of universities. Dozens of companies supply industrial ALD equipment, and with more coming onto the map each year, applications for ALD are seemingly endless. And given the seminal event this summer, I decided to learn a bit more about how we went from a small lab operation in Finland to the international pilgrimage we know today. So I sat down with two of the founding members of the AVS ALD conference, Professor Greg Parsons from North Carolina State University, and my PhD advisor at the University of Colorado, Professor Stephen George, to talk about the origins, growth, and future of the meeting. In this exclusive interview from the ALDepartment, Greg and Steve discussed the challenges surrounding the conception of the conference, an unexpected letter from a major ALD company, the enormous success of the first conference, and how they believe the meeting may change in the future. We have a lot to be thankful for to Greg and Steve and the others who started the AVS ALD conference. The community continues to welcome newcomers with open arms and serves as a perfect annual rendezvous for members of the field. As Greg puts it in this interview, the ALD conference is not only a good event, it is a fun event, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. So please grab your tea or coffee, and please enjoy Greg and Steve talking about the story of AVS ALD. Maybe we can jump right in since we're already talking about it, but yeah, I wanted to thank you guys again for joining me on this again, not with any company, just my own personal channel. So I really appreciate you taking the time. And I think this is a really important topic to talk about, the history of the ALD conference, because we are coming up on the 50-year anniversary of the ALD patent, with the ALD conference this summer being in Helsinki, just a stone's throw away from where Tuomo Suntola actually did the original ALD work. Maybe we can just start straight from the beginning. What was the kind of situation in the ALD world back in the late 90s, early 2000s that would have even prompted you to begin thinking about starting an ALD conference?
In fact, I was just going back, Greg, and looking at the JVST article on the history of like when things started, which is actually good to keep your memory clear on what happened. It was the thin film division of AVS trying to really kind of rebrand itself in a way, and acknowledging that the area of, like Greg said, the ALCVD that was emerging because of the semiconductor roadmap and need for more control on thin film deposition. Pivotal year was actually Boston in 2000, because that fall of 2000, Greg was there, Youngtog Jung from Korea was there. Steve Rossnagel, he was a very important figure in the very early years. I think he wanted to kind of see this area grow, because he was working in it. So it was a little bit like, okay, self-promotion of what he was doing, but also I think he was very right on in that the thin film division needed a shot on the arm, and thin film division, it was struggling, and this was a topic that they could grab hold on. But Greg was the chair. When were you chair, Greg? You were like chair in like 2000?
In 1999, I was elected chair for the year of 2000, as I remember. So that's when, so what happened was in 1999, I was elected chair, but for 2000, but really the division was kind of in a shambles. What happened was I found out at that meeting in November that the division had $25,000 in their bank. And I asked, what has the division ever spent money on? No one could remember ever spending money, and no one could ever remember earning money. So I was like, okay, well, let's spend this money. What should we do with the money? Because what I was told was, like Steve Rossnagel said, hey, AVS is on the verge of dismantling the thin film division. Other people said to me, Greg, you got to do something with thin film division. Doesn't matter what you do, just do something, right? And so I was like, okay, so let's spend some money, right? So and somebody said, well, we could have a meeting. And I was like, okay, well, let's have a meeting. What do you want to have a meeting about? And we kind of, that didn't really happen in 99, but it started happening, in 2000. And Steve, I don't know if you remember, but I didn't even know you back in 1999. I don't think. I think I met you. Maybe I met you in 99 or in 2000.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I remember distinctly, Greg. You came to me and said, "Look, there's nobody here in the thin film division. If you want to get involved, just show up." Basically.
Yeah. So basically, I recruited you
Yeah.
to join the thin film division. I also recruited, because this is one of the things, what we did in 99 was we had like a discussion. Okay, there were certain people, I remember maybe John Abelson was in that.
Yeah.
Who else was there?
John Kidder.
What's that?
John Kidder was really quite involved. He kind of faded away, but then, yeah, at the time he was quite involved.
And somebody said, we need to recruit someone with some AVS leadership. I said, well, so I reached out to Steve Rossnagel and said, Steve, come to our division meeting. And that was the division meeting we had in 2000, and you were there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we said we should have a meeting. And then we started debating about what the meeting should be. I found out later, Steve, that you had been attending the previous meetings in Europe, right? Or the previous.
Oh, yeah, the ALE meetings.
Yeah, the atomic layer epitaxy meetings, right?
Right.
And the last one of those, which I never attended, was in 1996. And what I understand was that at that meeting, you volunteered to run the next meeting.
The times were really changed rapidly, because I would say that this whole field of like ALD, formerly ALE, in what it was called, was at an all-time low in about 1995, 1996. I mean, I was just starting to do stuff. We'd had a couple papers come out, but really the field was at very much of a low point. Someone said, well, you should pick it up. And also, but it wasn't just that. It wasn't that to do another ALE meeting, but rather people realized it was falling apart, really. There wasn't that large a community that showed up for the meeting in Austria, actually. And so then the thought was, well, the ALE meeting would merge with another nano meeting that was going on at the time. And I tried actually to merge the ALE meeting with that other meeting, but they were very successful. That was more of like an STM oriented meeting and more microscopic microscopy type stuff. And they were not interested at all. But that did set us up, because I was feeling like, okay, it was something that I wanted to try to do. It didn't really, the timing, which is crazy to think, because that was only like 5 years before, 4 or 5 years. But in that 4 or 5 years, oh my God, everything just took off because of the roadmap and, the needs in the semiconductor industry. And then all of a sudden it was something like, oh yeah, everybody wants to do this. This is a meeting we want. Whereas 5 years earlier, it was almost dead.
That's so interesting. So the ALE stuff in Europe was kind of dying. The thin film division in the US, part of the AVS, was kind of dying. And then they both got married to revitalize themselves into what is now the AVS ALD meeting that we know today.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, it's hard to believe, because kind of like emerged from the ashes.
The other thing that was really key, that was the Korean connection, right? Mm-hmm. When Hyung-Tog said, he took me aside and he said, Greg, look at this. And he showed me his poster. He said, look at this. I'm doing atomic layer deposition. I'm the only person in Korea doing this. We didn't call it ALD back then. We were calling it ALCVD, right? Hyung-Tog, I've known him since graduate school. He and I were classmates at NC State in the physics department. He was actually in material science. I was in physics, but our labs were next door to each other. And we had been friends since graduate school. And so I ran into him. I'd seen him regularly at these AVS conferences and always been friendly with him. But our paths didn't really cross other than that. And when he showed me that he was doing this ALCVD, I said, hey, we're talking about this in the thin film division. You should come to the thin film division and we'll talk about it. So he was in that meeting also. Somehow out of that meeting, we decided we were going to do this atomic layer CVD conference, right? And that's what we called it, right? And then Steve, we started publicizing it, and you got a letter from ASM, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
They had trademarked ALCVD TM, superscript. And so,
Oh,
yeah, I got a
okay.
letter from them, which was kind of like a cease and desist letter, that this was a trademark of ASM, and that they said it's come to our attention that that you've published some papers where you've used this terminology, and there's potentially this meeting that's going to happen, and they just wanted to make it well known that this was not. They did not favor that use of that term, and
We were all worried. We were all upset and didn't know what to do. And then someone just said, let's call it the ALD conference.
yeah. Well, the thing was, yeah, because I actually went
That
back.
term was not widely used at the time.
Well, I can tell you because I actually have a copy of that letter right in front of me right now.
We have the artifact.
Yeah, it's dated.
And okay, this is what they said.
What's the date on it?
November 27th, 2000. So it was after we decided to do the workshop in the spring, and so this would have affected what we called the meeting. And so they said, in order to avoid confusion between ASM's proprietary technology and ALD processes more generally, please refrain from using ASM's trademarks in this context. Instead, we suggest using the generic terms that the entire industry has adopted, namely atomic layer epitaxy, ALE, or more recently, atomic layer deposition.
Oh, so they suggested it.
ALD, yeah. Because they say atomic layer CVD and atomic layer CVD or ALCVD. Yeah, ALCVD should be used only when referring specifically to ASM products and processes for ALD.
Wow.
So they used ALD in that letter.
They suggested that would be a better acronym.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But at the time we were like, no, maybe not. What we need to go up. We were debating about it, and then we kind of said, okay, let's do ALD.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's there's three-letter acronyms are always better.
Yeah. So we decided in 2000 we were going to do this, and it was going to be in 6 months or something, right? 7 months. And it's like, how are we going to do this? It's like, well, we can do it. We know that people will invite them, and we'll. The other thing we said was we want it to be kind of a small meeting. We want it to be fast turnaround. We said that this was the design of the meeting. It's like we're going to do the abstract submissions and the acceptances really quickly. We're going to kind of put the program together. We want the program to be really timely. So it's like, at the last minute, everybody submit their abstracts. We'll get the program together right away and then come and present. So everything's really fresh. That was the idea of the conference. Mm-hmm. And also Steve Rostnagel had the idea of, hey, let's record all the talks. It's like that was, people were just starting to use PowerPoint back in the, Tyler, you probably don't even remember, but it used to be that we would come with transparencies to conferences. Right.
Oh, we had some of those in school still.
Yeah. But that's how we did conferences. And it was like, oh, what's this new thing? PowerPoint. Everyone's starting to use PowerPoint. That was a new thing. And, oh, you know what? There's a button on there you can record. Oh, really? You can record your PowerPoint. Yeah. So it's like, well, let's do that. And so we started. That's what Steve Rostnagel's idea was to start doing that. And it's carried on to this day. It's gotten to be expensive, more expensive, but anyway, more fancy. But that was the idea. It was going to be separate this conference from other conferences. But so that's when we decided also, I'm not sure if did we decide at the outset, Steve, that we were going to do it annually, or were we going to say, how did this meeting go? What we were really shocked about was how many people actually showed up, right? Because we reserved a room, and the room overflowed, and we had to get another room and a video and a television in the other room in order for everybody to see.
Definitely. Yeah, it was experimental, and we worked with Della Miller from AVS. She was really instrumental.
Still at the AVS, yeah. Yeah,
and she was a newbie at AVS really at that time, but she was, yeah, so she got the conference, the little topical workshop, whatever you want to call it, piggybacked on a meeting that she had already been organizing at Monterey. That's how it worked. And so
that's right. So we got the spare room. They put us in, we just need a little tiny extra room for this little conference we're having. And yeah, it kind of exploded. Yeah.
because not only did we fill that room, but then we needed another room. And so there were like roughly 200 people there, but the main room only could seat maybe 50, 80, something like that. So then the satellite room had more people and had a video link to the main room. It was crazy. And you had to walk back and forth between the rooms, and it was a circus, really. And then it turned out we had many more people than the meeting that Della had originally planned for Monterey.
What do you think like contributed to there being so many more people than you expected? Because it sounds like it was like multiples of this 50 to 80 that you thought were going to be there.
Oh yeah, well, I think it partly was location. Monterey was really an easy drive from the Bay Area, and there were so many companies in the Bay Area that were interested, many more than we knew about. And I think we did a pretty good job advertising the first meeting. There was an email list, and then that email list went around. Della had a copy of it, and we asked people, okay, if you're interested, tell us other people that you think might be interested. So we built up an email list right from the very beginning, and then it just kind of, it's like you tell two friends, and then they tell two friends, and so on and so on. It's like that dumb commercial. But anyway, I think that's what happened.
I think having it in Monterey, like Steve said, was really important. And also, the realization that, people knew too, back then that the structure, the standard structure of silicon dioxide wasn't going to make it. People knew that we needed something else. And if you're going to do a high K, you needed to do deposition, right? You needed to deposit it. So there was an interest in deposition in general, right? So semiconductor people were interested, and people had heard about this atomic layer CVD, but didn't really know what it was. And it's like, oh, there's a meeting on it. It's like, let's go find out what's going on, right? Let's find out what it is. People didn't know what it was, right? So there was a buzz about it in the semiconductor community that I think really helped also.
Yeah, and that really can't be understated. That was the key technological driver, was the replacement of SiO2 with a high K gate dielectric, because there was so much work that was done on that topic. Semitech was a big driver for that, and so that's what kind of like knitted everybody together.
Yeah. So then during this first one, presumably the main topics that were being talked about were high K dielectric deposition.
No, not really. There was just people talking about. I remember Miko gave an invited talk on what is ALD, and he just kind of laid out the parameters, right? And talk about precursors, and talked about, hey, how do you think about growth per cycle? What's saturation? Are we really doing a monolayer per cycle? And what about how does the different precursors affect the growth? And I remember he talked about the importance of thinking about etching during deposition. That was even discussed back then. I mean, they had just figured that out a couple, recently with niobium nitride and stuff like that. And they had talked about all sorts of different things, and just kind of, taught everybody what the process was.
How like what percentage of the people attending the meeting would you say had no idea about ALD, or like, weren't coming from any deposition?
Probably 90%.
But I just,
wow, okay. I was there and I had no idea.
Yeah, for the first meeting, it was more people coming with like eyes wide open, just trying to learn. Yeah,
that was
wild success.
That's a successful conference, and I would like to think that the conference has still got a lot of people who it attracts people who don't know, right? Yeah. Because and that's kind of the mission of the conference is we want to teach people. We want this to be a place where people can come to learn. And I think that that kind of sentiment is still present in the conference.
Well, yeah, I mean, look at the Sunday tutorial. I mean, that's very well attended, and that's basically just an educational day. So yeah, I think people come to learn, and then old timers come just to find out like what other people are going to say too.
So the other thing that really helped was our decision early on, and I was trying to remember when we made this decision, Steve, to do the international cycle. And we said that because the reason I brought up Youngtog was because Youngtog was there, and I think maybe was it at the the May meeting that we decided, hey, let's do this again and let's get this cycle going. So let's do it in Korea next year.
Yeah.
And then we'll come back to the US, and then we'll send it to Asia. We'll send it to Europe.
I think,
and then we'll come back to the US, and this was deliberate. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't like we deliberately set that up as a guide for the conference. And I think doing that really made a big difference in terms of bringing the world together, making it accessible for China and accessible to, everybody in Korea and also all the Europeans. Everybody feels like they can contribute.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and AVS was really anxious to do it too, because they, AVS is like the international blah blah blah, right? But they didn't really do too much international, so it was in their interest too to try to promote an international meeting. So yeah, the timing was right. It was politically correct at AVS to reach out and go outside the boundary of the U.S.
Okay, yeah, that's great. So then it sounds like if it was a successful meeting, you already had some kind of outlook for the future of what it might look like. You would bring it internationally. Did you expect it to grow as much as it has grown to where it is today? Or did it kind of stay small for a little while, and then all of a sudden, it just really blew up into the hundreds or thousands that we have attend now?
It's pretty interesting because the first meeting was just a little under 200, and then I was just looking at the stats in the article that was in JVSTA, and it stayed around like 180, 210, 190. It bounced around, but it was kind of like 200 for a while. But then it was I think maybe about like 10, 12 years later, it really had a big bump up. Because it went from that 200-ish to 500, then to 800, and then I think it peaked at a meeting at Incheon in Korea when it went over 1,000 for the first time. But I think it did grow, but it was very gradual at first. But then after 5, 8, 10 years, something like that, the numbers started to increase a lot. And I think it was the applications, all the applications that people were starting to work on that then really caused the attendance to boost.
Well, was there like a particular direction that you wanted to take the conference, or were you happy to just anything that was coming out that ALD had an application for?
What I remember was, when I was the chair, I remember we had a committee meeting, right? And we were like, okay, what should we do? And we kind of said, well, what we should do is each chair should kind of pick a focus for what they want the focus to be. And, have some kind of theme or something. And that worked for a while. I can't remember. I picked a theme. I was like, okay, I wanted to bring in more people in the computational area. So I said, I'm going to find a few people that are doing computational research in this area, because at the time there wasn't that much. So, but after that, I think, it kind of melded away, and we were trying to say, okay, we need to build attention on applications outside of semiconductors, because, the high K metal gate stuff was taking so much attention. And we've had a feeling, which is true, of course, now in hindsight, that there are many, many other applications that are viable. And we were debating among ourselves, okay, everybody knows there's a commercial application in semiconductors, but what's going to be the next commercial application? And people, it's going to be barriers. It's going to be this. It's going to be that. Mm-hmm. Nobody said batteries, right? Which is now one of the bigger ones. But what are you going? So we tried to kind of bring in and focus attention on applications outside of semiconductors. But I don't think there's really been, it hasn't really been a continuing theme in terms of how to do that.
Yeah, there's always been a strong contingent that was interested in the fundamentals. So there was a group that really said, oh no, this should be a meeting for the fundamentals. And then early days, like the first 5 meetings or so, the high K theme was just so dominant that some people are going like that weren't working in that area are going like, oh my God, I don't have to sit through another talk on hafnium oxide ALD.
Right.
But then as the new applications started to come in, then it started to broaden, and then also the high K problem really got solved, and so that kind of started to diminish in importance. I mean, there were other semiconductor topics that rose up, but it kind of is. I think it's a really good balance right now in terms of, and I don't think it, like Greg said, there hasn't been an attempt to focus on any like one thing or to try to direct it one way. It just kind of what happens.
But I can tell you too, commenting on your thinking about the fundamentals. I remember times after some meetings, some people, some well-known, really well-regarded people in the community would say after me, come to me and say, Greg, I didn't learn anything at this conference. There's no new fundamentals. It's all applications. Right? I didn't learn anything, right? So it really struck me that we really need to bring more attention to the fundamentals. And when we, because Steve and I and Erwin and June and other people, we have discussions with the chairs, right? And we always urge them to be sure to focus on fundamentals, right?
I mean, I've said this a few times when I was doing the podcast for Bennick that like ALD really, we're still figuring out so much about it because it was invented kind of as a commercial application entity. It was patented and then used for the thin film displays and all of this. And yes, there was a ton of background work that went there, but it kind of was conceived as like applicable technology and not necessarily some fundamental thing that people spent a lot of time studying how exactly it works. It's like, oh, it works for this thing that we wanted it to work for, and it kind of took off from there still, even with the high K stuff, I think.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, it didn't grow out of like a basic science community. So there are a lot of things that are not appreciated as a result. In fact, Charles Musgrave did some early theory on some of the first ALD reactions, and it turned out people didn't really pay much attention to it because they didn't care. As long as it worked, fine. They'll just want just as long as it worked, then we'll just go on and use it, and then go on to the next thing. But like some of when I go back and look at some of the early stuff, which I do for preparing for like ALD courses, for example, Musgrave talked about these precursors that precede the reaction, like for the TMA water reaction, the most basic reaction. And people still, like you'd ask somebody, oh, show me the potential energy diagram for TMA water reaction, and they wouldn't acknowledge that there was a precursor that was there.
Hey, Steve, I just showed that in my class this morning.
You did. Good for you.
From Charles, and I talked about the Lewis acid adduct.
Yeah, the Lewis acid base concept. Yeah, but but that's one thing where you'd say the ALD community really does not appreciate the fundamentals of the reaction at that level, and that's pretty basic level, But you're right. It's because it started from commercial applications. It didn't come out of a basic science background. And so there are just a lot of holes in fundamental understanding.
When was the exhibition added? Was that early on, or did that take some time before?
We did not have it in 2001. 2002, there may have been something in Korea, but really 2003 is when we started. That's when we did it in San Jose. In San Jose, we did it on purpose, as I remember. And we bought lunch for everybody. I remember, I was the chair of 2003. So I remember what we decided to do was buy sub sandwiches for everybody and we kept the lunch period short, but we gave out lunches in the meeting, in the what do you call it, the vendor area, to get people to mix with the vendors.
Yeah.
And that was kind of unusual at the time to do that way. Everybody does it that way now, but that was kind of a new idea back then. It wasn't our idea necessarily, but it was just kind of people just started doing that.
Well, now you have all the companies at the exhibition figuring, okay, well, what can I now supply at my booth to get people to come talk to me? Forget about what the conference organized. I'm going to have my own coffee machine and my own box of croissants.
And the other thing that started happening that really surprised me and really helped the meeting was the sponsors' interest in events. And they started having parties. They started having competing parties. So we always had a reception. We always had a Sunday night reception, right? And at the first one, it was like, oh, just everybody meet in the bar. I mean, that was it, right? And then somebody's going to pick up the tab, and that was it. And it started getting bigger and bigger. But then companies said, well, we're going to host a party. And we've always had, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday meetings, right? And there's been some discussion many times about, oh, we need to make it a 4-day meeting. We've always said, no, we're not going to make it a 4-day meeting. But because it's a 3-day meeting, that really only leaves 3 nights, right? Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. And companies started wanting to have parties and promote their tools and whatnot. And then that turned into, it helped really bring in, the word got around like, hey, this is not just a good scientific conference, but this is a fun conference. This is a place you can go and, have some fun with and meet people. And, the other thing that really happened, and this is something that I just kind of realized this past year, somebody said, this is a must-go-to conference because here is where I meet. This is from one of the equipment manufacturers, right? They're saying, here's where I come to meet the people I sell to, and I meet the people I buy from, right? I meet the people that sell me stuff, and I meet the people that I sell stuff to. And I think that if you talk to anybody, any of the industrial people, they'll tell you the same thing. There's like a supply chain, right, in the semiconductor industry, everywhere from like basic chemicals to valves to precursor bottles, to every element in the ALD reactor, the control systems, and then the people that buy the reactors, they're all there, right? Every element of the supply chain is there. And so this kind of surprised me, hey, I have to come to this conference. It's like, if I want to continue to keep my business where it is, I have to be here.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think all of my experiences at the ALD conference have all given me a much broader, rounder, more comprehensive context and understanding for how our community industry works.
The other thing that companies get from coming is they get access to the students, right? And these are the future hires.
Yeah, I think that is huge. It's not that easy to find people who know how to do ALD still. We're still somehow a very important part of a lot of industries, particularly the semiconductor one, but still a small enough community that sourcing talent is not that easy yet. But yeah, I would love to talk a little bit now about where the conference is today and kind of where you see it going. So it has gone from being not just ALD and not just fundamentals of ALD, but many applications. The exhibition is there. A few years ago now, the atomic layer etching aspect of it has been added to the conference. So there's been another kind of vignette as part of the 3 days. So I would love to hear your thoughts on where you'd like to see the conference go from now, if you anticipate it even changing, if more things might be added in the future, if it might become longer.
Yeah, well, I think that with the atomic layer etching being added to the atomic layer deposition meeting, it's really becoming now more atomic layer processing. And I think a lot of people are starting, it didn't, at the beginning, there was some resistance about that, but now I think most people are buying in that this is a good thing, because those two different communities were quite distinct, and now they've merged together. And so I think it's more stable with them together. Also, there's a lot more synergy with the people that came in from etching, meeting up and doing things with the people from deposition. So I think in terms of the overarching theme of the meeting, I think it's really atomic layer processing now, and then where that takes us. So I think that's a big one. And then also I think in terms of more applications. There still are a lot of applications that haven't been exploited. Tools for high volume manufacturing, ways to do things more efficiently, bring costs down, speed faster. I think those are still big topics that will, they'll improve the position of both ALD and ALE going forward in the marketplace. I think those will be good topics. And there's just a lot more to, look at all the things just recently. You think, it's kind of like the status that physics was at right at the 1900s, where they thought, classical physics, we've got all this stuff figured out. And yet you find out, oh no, there's all these quantum effects that come in, and then it just revolutionizes everything. I think the ALD community now with ALE is still like that. There's new stuff coming in all the time that is basically saying, well, no, there are new chemistries, there are new applications. And I think, I don't think, Greg would probably agree with me, like when, go back to 2001, I don't know that we really thought things would be like they are right now. Because how many meetings have this kind of this long history that are topical? Societal meetings, the societal meetings go on for decades and decades, but topical meetings like this don't necessarily have that long a run. But it has gone really well, and I think I don't see any reason why it doesn't go for multiple more decades.
Yeah, I agree with Steve that bringing in the etching is really, transformed this into an atomic layer processing meeting. We don't call it that yet, and there will be some hesitation, of course, to changing it from the ALD conference, right? But in fact, that's what it is. It's really atomic layer processing. And my gut feeling is that, well, I know that, the meetings, I couldn't imagine, 20 years ago coming and seeing what's going on now, right? And I think if we were to hibernate somehow and wake up 20 years from now, I'd like to think that we would go to the meeting, it would still be here, of course, and we wouldn't recognize some of the research or some of the results, things that people are doing. I think that, if you say, well, let's do atomic scale processing, I think there are ways to do atomic scale processing that we haven't realized yet. There are things that we could do, and people are going to figure that out. And then when they do, it's going to be like, oh yeah, this is obvious. We should have been doing this a long time ago, right? It's like the self-limiting reactions, right? It's like, oh, that's kind of, why didn't we think of that before, right? So, there's going to be some new discoveries that are going to revolutionize things, and people can pivot very quickly. And I think that those pivots will happen, and they're unpredictable. And, as long as we work to keep the community open, and I think one of the reasons, as Steve says, one of the reasons that these topical conferences tend to go away is because people get protective. They say, oh, we're doing this, we're not doing that, right? We work on this topic and we were interested in this topic, so we're going to focus on this topic. And that's really outside of our topic. So we're not going to accept that paper, right? And that's what happens is the topics die because people aren't open to bringing in new ideas. And so as long as we keep the community open to the concepts of bringing in new ideas, even if they may seem tangential or may seem like they don't fit or may seem controversial or whatever, this will be this community will continue to be impactful.
Yeah, it was really interesting. Markku Leskola gave a lecture at the last ALD meeting, and he it was kind of history, and he was talking about going back and looking through old notebooks. And it was really interesting because there were so many like honest admissions about what happens, because they saw a lot of stuff that they didn't report because they didn't really think people would, it wasn't acceptable, it wasn't accepted in the field. But now they're going back and looking at old notebooks and they're discovering, oh, there were all these other things that they saw that they thought were just like mistakes or artifacts or whatever that turned out to be like they're really there. And yeah, I mean, even if we just go back and mine our own old lab notebooks, we'll probably find discoveries that we just didn't want to think about because we thought, well, this isn't going to be accepted by the community, so we're just going to present the party line more or less and not bring up these what look like things that aren't quite right. But then, hey, they're there and they're telling us about something else that's really valuable.
Yeah, I think the merging of deposition and etching is really going to have some impact, for example, right? I think that we're going to discover new stuff doing that. And that's, I think, just the tip of the iceberg in terms of, where, what other kind of processing tricks and, can we develop, and what, as we expand our fundamental understanding and the ability to design molecules, right? The ability to synthesize materials at the molecular scale and deliver those molecules to a surface in a controlled fashion. I think there's going to be, it's going to continue to grow and expand. We're going to learn. We need to learn a lot more, and I think we have the meeting that can make that happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually, Tyler, for this meeting coming up in Helsinki too, I think it could be really interesting because it's a 50-year anniversary of the first the application of Suntolas patent. I think people are going to be a little more philosophical and kind of looking back and probably making predictions too. That's why I'm kind of excited about the Helsinki meeting, because I think it's going to be a little more even though it's going to be looking back, it's going to be also looking forward.
One thing I'm sad about is the Russians are probably not going to be able to be there. Malagin and others in Russia multiple times, and I know that they feel like they're part of the community. They want to be part of the community. They want, they're not. There's not like you can imagine that there might be some sort of, conflict between the Finns and the Russians, but I don't think there is. I think that they feel like they're recognized, and they understand too their historical limitations in terms of their ability to communicate back in the 60s. So I think that everything is fine with that. I just think they want to continue being part of the community, but it's sad to me that they can't because of the politics, international politics.
Yeah, it will be tough. I mean, even the border is closed between Finland and Russia. It's a difficult situation. But yeah, I know Greg Parsons has been very passionate about that topic as well, and making sure that the history of the technology has been clarified, and gives credit also to the Russian scientists and all of their work that was happening in congruency with the work that was being done by Suntola in Finland. And yeah, it would be great if we were able to have also the other kind of co-inventors there as well. Yeah, as one last question, we only have a couple of minutes here. I just wanted to ask each of you, which of the, I guess now 23 meetings, or well, I guess one of them was remote, but of the 23 meetings that have happened ahead of now this one in Helsinki, which was your favorite one and why?
Well, I think for me anyway, it'd have to be the first one, because it was just like this bomb went off. And also I think partly for myself, I've been kind of, I mean, like I'm doing stuff in a chemistry department that's not always that well appreciated. And I never really felt like I had a community so much, an academic community within chemistry with the work that I did have done. But with this meeting, when the meeting started, then all of a sudden I had a community, and that meant so much to me. So.
Yeah, I like the first one too. I also like the most recent one just because that's the one I remember the most. That was a really fun conference. The one in Washington was really fun, but you can't forget the one in Bruges too. That one was really great. Because it's beautiful, and Irwin had the party in the beer hall to begin with. Also, the one in I really like the one in Ireland. That was really great. Let's see. Again, I like them all, man. I like them all. The one it's hard to find. The first one in Helsinki was really great too, because that was it was just kind of, hey, we're in the place of hallowed ground with ALD, and the excitement of all the Finns having all the world there, introducing their city and everything. It was really great.
Yeah.
So this is too hard to pick one.
Well, I think it was like appropriate since we just had the eclipse yesterday, but all the planets were aligned. There are particular times when everything lines up and it makes something happen. And I think that's what really there was just everything was in alignment for the.
It was the people. The people were in alignment.
Yeah.
Right. It was you and me and Young Tog and other people on the thin film division, and the people in AVS were aligned. Steve Rostnagel was there. It was, all the people were, everybody needed something, and what we all brought made it, right?
Yeah.
And we're lucky that it happened that way too, because as you guys said, who would have known that it would be what it is today and what we're all going to go see in Helsinki?
There are thousands of other ways it could have turned out, and the one way that it did turn out, we are lucky.